First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day, we pledge allegiance to the Republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the Republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those two little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event,
I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade.
It was at this moment that he knew he f***ed up.
It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that. On the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. Here, our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution, which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal.
If you're looking for a clear encapsulation of the difference between House Democrats and House Republicans, it doesn't get any clearer than this. I mean, there's taking someone to school, and then there's dragging someone on said school bus, forcing them into a classroom and having them sit through said lesson over and over again.
This amendment needs to be passed. And for assurance, for the previous 3 Congresses, I've introduced a constitutional amendment. In this Congress, it's H.J. Res. 37. I assume Mr. Raskin will run down and co-sponsor it immediately because he knows that he could amend the Constitution and defend the principle that is at stake here. I urge all of our colleagues to sponsor this bill, to vote yes on this bill, and get it passed. And I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona reserved. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, why do you need to amend the Constitution if you can just go ahead and do it by statute here? That's rather curious. I think the gentleman doth protest a little bit too much. I admire the intellectual honesty in putting forth a constitutional amendment because that's precisely what needs to be done. And I'd be very happy to look at that and appreciate his candor in admitting that the Constitution needs to be amended in order to overturn more than 2 centuries of practice and everything the Supreme Court has ever said about the issue. It also should be clear to everybody that only U.S. citizens of majority may vote in federal elections. That's federal law. But everybody, including children who are U.S. citizens, are counted, even though they can't vote in federal elections. I'll reserve, Mr. Speaker.
There are certain weeks in American politics where the clear disparity between both political parties are laid bare. This was one of them. While Republicans are trying to make refrigerators great again, while also arguing over their 152nd choice for Speaker, embarrassing themselves in front of their colleagues and the world.
Anything else on the record?
Do you think Marjorie Taylor Greene should be punished?
One dumpster fire at a time. Let's take care of the motion to vacate, and then we can worry about whatever comes next.
And it turns out the signature piece of legislation for the extreme MAGA Republicans this week, this month, this year is Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. This is what we are dealing with on this magical House floor with all of the challenges that the American people are confronting. Liberty for laundry. Defending the dignity of dishwashers, fighting for freedom of refrigerators. This is what we're doing? Can't make it up. You can't make it up.
Democrats, specifically led by the Democratic president, are implementing legislation that, get this, benefits the everyday American. And not just any groundbreaking legislation, by the way, but legislation that the current Republican frontrunner Donald Trump promised and failed to deliver on. In fact, let's bring back that joke from yesterday, shall we? It was too good. But akin to the night he promised Stormy Daniels, it fizzled out pretty quick.
Damn! So Peter, this new AI Microsoft thing, $3 billion, big job creators, that's in Racine. Isn't that the same town that Foxconn said, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, we're going to build a big plant, and they never did?
Yes, and that was a huge Trump announcement back then, and he said that the factory was going to be the 8th wonder of the world, but then Foxconn decided to really scale back their plans, and the land is still available, so Microsoft is going in.
It's going to be good for those people.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Anyway, with the stark differences already wildly apparent, Maryland Democrat Jamie Raskin stepped up to the plate like a currently informed Shotani, and of course he brought it home. On the receiving end was Wisconsin Republican Glenn Grothman, who tried to lecture Raskin with a full chest on the use of the word republic in the Pledge of Allegiance. I know, typical Republicans, right? Always zoning in on the important stuff impacting people today. But what took place as a rebuttal almost had certain representatives call the authorities, because it was almost criminal.
First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day, we pledge allegiance to the republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those two little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm about to yield to my friend, Ms. Meng from New York, but I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And Reverend Bellamy, who was an abolitionist in Vermont, was concerned about the continuing salute of the Confederate battle flag in the southern states. And so he wanted to write a flag salute that would be unifying for the Union. And he wrote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation with liberty and justice for all." And you notice what is not in there. He did not have under God. That was added in 1954 by Congress, several weeks after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. But in any event, I'm not quite sure what the relevance is of the gentleman's invocation of the Republic or of Ben Franklin and the famous vignette about him saying, if you can keep it. Ben Franklin was, of course, a big supporter of immigration to the country, although he did display an anti-German bias in some of his writings. But I'll tell you a little story about Ben Franklin that might be of relevance to what the gentleman's talking about. Apparently, because I just did a tour in Philadelphia with the Ben Franklin people up there, and we learned this wonderful story. He made a loan to a friend of his for $100, and then he recorded in his diary that this gentleman he made a loan to for $100, Josiah, was always disappearing behind a tree or a building whenever Ben came along. And he finally caught up with them and he said, "Josiah, you know, I loaned you $100, and I'm wondering, am I going to be able to get my principal back, or at least the interest?" And Josiah said, "Well, Ben, look, the $100 is well invested somewhere else. So you don't have to worry about that." And Franklin said, "Well, what about the interest?" He said, "Well, I forgot to tell you that it's against my religion to pay interest, so I can't pay you the interest." So Franklin said, "You mean to tell me it's against your principal to pay me the interest, and it's against your interest to pay me the principal?" And Josiah said, "Well, that's right." So Franklin said, "Well, I can see I'm not going to get either." Well, look, here our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution, which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal. But it's also in our interests because, as my colleagues have said, this is a land that is built on immigration, except for the Native Americans who are already here and the people who were brought over as slaves. All of us are the descendants of immigrants to this country. Tom Paine said when he got to America in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution, he said, "This land, if it lives up to its principles, will become an asylum to humanity." not an insane asylum, mind you. An asylum to humanity, a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from religious, political, and economic oppression. That's who we are.
And this is not the first time that Jamie Raskin has handed out free lessons to his Republican colleagues. I distinctly recall a debate over the Second Amendment in which Republicans were conveniently picking apart certain words of the Second Amendment whilst ignoring that whole well-regulated militia part.
My friend from Texas, Mr. Roy, advances the so-called insurrectionist view of the Second Amendment, that the Second Amendment's purpose is to give the people the right to overthrow or fight our government or fight the police or threaten armed resistance if the government is somehow being unfair or unjust. This reading is totally, absolutely absurd and flies in the face of the plain text of the Constitution, which in at least 5 different places clearly forbids armed violent resistance to the government. The Republican Guarantee Clause in Article 4, Section 4 provides that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or the executive against domestic violence. This was put in the Constitution specifically in response to Shays' Rebellion and armed resistance to the government of the United States, which the founders strongly opposed. Here's another provision the gentleman from Texas should consider before cavalierly suggesting in public that citizens somehow have a constitutional right to use arms against our government and our police. Article 3, Section 3, Clause 1 states, in the only constitutional passage that defines a crime, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Armed insurrection and violence against the United States is plainly making war against our government and thus is an act of treason. And I could cite all of the other ones. And what do they have against this? A quote from Patrick Henry, an anti-federalist who opposed the Constitution precisely because he thought it gave too much power to the federal government and didn't endow the people with a right of violent resistance against the government of the United States. That's not constitutional law. That's a constitutional joke. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
And here's a bigger picture, right? I understand that from the outside looking in, it's hard to have faith in the current political system when you have representatives like this filing motions on behalf of her party where some of her colleagues actually call her a responsible legislator. I mean, hell, some of her own constituents can't even believe that she was elected to represent them.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. This is the uniparty for the American people watching.
Gentlelady will suspend. Order.
I'm also grateful to all veterans who have served, as well as the men and women who serve our country right now, so that we can give our men and women in uniform all the tools that they need and treat them the best way possible.
Please, for me to understand.
Well, I was talking about how the leadership of this country caused 13 to get killed in Afghanistan, which I'm sure as a veteran that upsets you. They armed the Taliban. They now have training in the military for woke training. Those are the things I was talking about. Forcing COVID-19.
That has nothing to do with my service. Here's the problem.
Sir, you can come out and argue with me that I did not say that.
Disparaging things against the Jewish community or disrespecting the United States Congress, and you're ashamed.
But then you see someone like Jamie Raskin at work, and your faith in the system is somewhat restored. And you understand why he was tasked with representing the American people. Because his outlook, despite the constant back and forth between both parties, rarely wavers. Because he's not just there for gotcha clicks or to file a motion to vacate the speakership again so that he can get the attention he so desperately craves, but he's there to be an example for what it means to serve in public office. Now, of course, when pressed by those who belong to the party of failed impeachments and UNICEF for gas stoves, there comes a time when he has to bite back, and it's worth viewing. But still, he never loses sight of who he's there to represent. The American people.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.